Let's have a talk, let's have a chat, talking about a little this and that. Hello and welcome to another episode of This and That. I am your host, Mary Easterling, and today we are hosting Daughter of Zion Eternally. So before I begin to listen to anything else from This and That, go to talkingaboutthistandthat.wordpress.com and click on the podcast link. Since this is from Daughter of Zion, you'll have to go to the Daughter of Zion Eternally link on our podcast page, click on it, and then scroll down to find this episode. This is called Elihu Responds, and Daughter of Zion Eternally is alluding to Job, where Job has gone through this terrible thing, and Job's friends, there are only 3 listed, come and there's this long discourse. They talk, Job whines, they talk, Job complains, they talk, Job, moans and groans and right. And then suddenly Job's done talking, his friends are done talking, and the book is just like, there's nothing more to say. And suddenly we have this person, and he shows up, and he just carries us on to the end of the book where God shows up. Now, they say they borrowed this from an even older literature, Mesopotamian literature, and then it somehow found its way into the writings of Moses, or Moses borrows from it, or because don't ever forget, these are going to be parts of the Old Testament, the Tanakh. I find it interesting because I think, sure, you had the man, he went through the thing, he had his comforters, Job's comforters, that's never a good idea, and then there's this face-off with the deity. It's kind of a cultural story that could be said to have been borrowed. I just have to put forth the question, and this is just me speaking before I get into Daughter of Zion Eternally. Why in the world would God have Job put into Scripture to begin with? I mean, why? If it's a cultural tale, there's all that business with God and Satan and this sort of bet about Job and the integrity of Job, and have you ever noticed Job, and where have you been, And also now to listen to anything from Daughter of Zion or to look at anything from Daughter of Zion, go to daughterofzioneternally.wordpress.com and take a look around. There's a lot of good teaching there. You can find me also on Substack, mfeast.substack.com. It's a little different talking about this and that there, but I am there. Maybe we'll put this up on the Substack. Maybe we won't. We will see. Daughter of Zion Eternally writes, we look at Job, the man God says he went after for no good reason, other than the appearance that the adversary egged him on. God bragged about Job, but when the shoe hit, Job came under an indictment, not one of simply being righteous in his own eyes, but of speaking without knowledge. In the end, Job is given an incomparable gift of knowing God. Job was acquitted and made the offerings for his friends, but we're not exactly talking about Job here. We're talking about the quote-unquote friends. They were listed, only 3, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar. Thus, Job, who is going through a literal hell on earth, cries, moans, and curses everything but God himself, but he makes the statement that if this is not God doing this, then who? What Job doesn't know is Job's problem. Then again, when we listen to Job's friends, we find insult is added to injury, and the persecution mounts. So, where does the last speaker in this come from? He's not on the guest list. Elihu in Hebrew basically means, my God is he, or he is my God. Now, that is a really interesting name to suddenly crop up out of nowhere. He comes on with, quote, I am younger and I am shy and I have waited to talk because I figured you all were older and wiser, but apparently age doesn't necessarily mean one is wise, unquote. Job 32, 7 through 9. One more thing. This Elihu is the son of one Barachel, and in the Hebrew, names have meaning. So in looking it up, sure enough, this name means God has blessed, or whom God has blessed. Now, this just makes this fellow more and more interesting by the line. Here's the full name. God is my God, son of whom God has blessed. Now, if this isn't messianic, I mean, seriously? Seriously. Job 32, 13, and 14. becomes this flat-out rebuke to the men who had been talking with Job. They had neither corrected Job, nor had they answered Job. Job 32:12 through 14. For someone so quote-unquote young, this Elihu sure takes on an air of authority here, but he leaves clues as to who he thinks he is, because quite frankly, Elihu sounds like a really fired-up preacher or a quote-unquote son of man. So what are these clues? Job 32:14. Now he's not directed his words against me, neither will I answer him with your speeches. Elihu will be speaking for himself here and offering something more. The something more he offers is to rise up in the defense of God. He also correctly indicts Job. Job 33:3 through 7 is our first clue. Verse 3, my words shall be of the uprightness of my heart, and my lips shall utter knowledge clearly. For the Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty has given me life. 5, if you can answer me, set your words in order before me, stand up. 6, behold, I am according to your wish in God's stead. I am also formed out of the clay. 7, behold, my terror shall not make you afraid, neither shall my hand be heavy upon you. One can argue the first two lines as both, perhaps. My words will be out of the uprightness of my heart. My lips will utter knowledge clearly. The Spirit of God made me. The breath of the Almighty has given me life. Fine. But the challenge then gets laid out. If you can argue with me, stand up and do so. Fine. But verse 6 is strange. I am according to your wish in God's stead. In the transliteration from, and she uses this, scripture4all.org. Scripture, the number 4, all.org. Really is, cheap, cheesy advertisement here, a nice little transliteration set. The Hebrew doesn't give you the Strong's numbers, but the Greek does. It is an Old Testament, New Testament. I have them as tabs on my Google, but you can also download them onto your desktop. Just saying. So she's using this, and according to that transliteration, she says we find, quote, behold, I, as bidding of you to El, from clay am, quote-unquote, twitched, or made, unquote. Now, that is usually glossed over too quickly, so why say this? Why does Elihu introduce himself in that manner? Who wished of El or God anything? Job did. Job wanted to face God and make his case. He wanted to be heard. Now, this is primal. Man, the creation of God in his time of pain and hopelessness, cries out, wanting to know if he is even listened to. God is now proving that he has been listening to every word the entire time. Elihu is Job's wish. Now, isn't that curious? Just remember, Elihu comes out of nowhere. He's not listed until Job has finally shut his mouth, and Job's friends are like, quote-unquote, well, aren't we self-righteous? But if you think about it and consider God's statements to Satan about Job, Job isn't wrong. So far as he knew about God, he was in the right with God. Neither at any time does Elihu state differently. Full stop. She's right. I've read Job. Elihu never says Job sinned. Elihu just says Job has no idea what he's talking about. He is absolutely spouting nonsense. And in the end of the book, God sides with Job against his friend. And he has this short discourse. Job finally says, I heard about you. Now I see you, and I hear you. I'm an idiot. I will sit down now, shut my mouth, and throw dust over my head. That's the I'm an idiot. I'm sorry. I've misspoken. Please pardon me. I'll sit down and do the penitent thing, cultural penitence, throw dust over my head type thing, which if you're covered with sores really isn't a great idea, folks, from a health standpoint. Just saying. Daughter of Zion eternally writes, no, his indictment will be Job's lack of understanding and knowledge. Now, the next sentence is also interesting, considering who Elihu just might be, to then say that his terror will not make anyone fear, nor will the hand be heavy upon anyone. This is so very much like Jesus. When he came in flesh, he was not there to judge. Now, when asked to render judgment, he did so, right up to getting an apparent adulteress off the hook from a stoning. Yet he chides her to go her way and, quote-unquote, sin no more, or don't do this again. He will tell us his burden is, quote-unquote, light, so the heavy hand is not there. But Elihu goes on with the breadcrumbs. Elihu will begin to set the record straight and pretty much preach the gospel, as it were, right up till verse 32 of chapter 33. Chapter 33, verse 32 and 33. If you have anything to say, answer me. Speak, for I desire to justify you. If not, hearken to me. Listen to me. Hold your peace, and I will teach you wisdom. I desire to justify you. This is exactly what the Son of Man literally does on the cross for those whom God has foreknown. This is a messianic heart. He invites discussion, or then if Job doesn't want to answer, then he will, quote-unquote, teach wisdom. But he doesn't stop there. Elihu's discourse on God is fascinating. By the way, full stop, Daughter of Zion doesn't go into the entire discourse. Read it for yourself, folks, and read how God responds to Job and what God tells Job. That's some fascinating look under the hood of the kingdom and how God does stuff. In fact, all you eggheads out there and scientists, go read about what God talks to Job about. There's science there. Maybe even black holes. I don't know. Space-time fabric? I don't know. I think it's all in there. Of course, that's just me. Daughter of Zion eternally writes, he exposes how God speaks to the heart in dreams, visions, at night, when the mind is at rest or in dream state. We understand that dreaming is how the mind sorts through and tries to make sense of life. In those days, men considered their dreams and what portents they might hold. Elihu keeps talking about the character of God and the actions that character produces, very much in an intimate tone of voice. But Elihu doesn't stop with Job himself. In chapter 34, Elihu turns on those aged and wise men who had done nothing for Job. 34:2. Hear my words, O you wise men, and give ear unto me, you that have knowledge. Elihu says this, and I'm instantly struck by these words, and they're echoed in the Proverbs, and they are in the Proverbs that deal with wisdom. Proverbs 1:20 through 23, 2:2 through 3, 4:20, 5:1, 22:17, 23:12. Some are the father speaking to his son, others are about wisdom. Elihu is telling us something. Are we listening? Full stop. You realize the Proverbs will have been written by Solomon, umpity-dumpity-dump years later, after David. Elihu and Solomon and David are, Job and his era, and that's a big space of time, folks. The more I read this, more I'm curious who Elihu actually thinks he is. Daughter of Zion eternally writes, Elihu continues to go pretty much line by line and argument by argument of what Job has been insisting and starts responding. Of Job, he states, chapter 34, verses 7 and 8, what man is like Job, who drinks up scorning like water, which goes in company with the workers of iniquity and walks with wicked men? The first verse notes that Job, quote-unquote, drinks up, not, quote-unquote, spews out, but drinks up. This is a turn of phrase. To vomit or spew forth is to speak, but to drink up is to listen. Basically, he tells us that Job is listening to scorners. And I am struck by the first Psalm of David that will be written a long time later, that the man who does not sit in the seat of scorners is blessed. Remember that all of this is pre-Moses and pre-Mosaic law or Torah. Abraham is not even considered here by mankind. No prophecy will go forth until Abraham and God form this quote-unquote relationship. This is in the time of the patriarchs. Now that last verse, quote-unquote, who goes in the company of workers of iniquity, and right there I'm hearing the rebuke of Jesus himself. Depart from me, worker of iniquity, I never knew you. Matthew 7:23, 25:41, and Luke 13:27. Elihu lumps the two together, the worker of iniquity with wicked man, which is also something Jesus is saying to the goats in the day of his judgment on the nations. It is the iniquitous workers who are doing the quote-unquote scorning that Job is sitting there listening to and vainly trying to fight. Does it make sense that Job might be talking without knowledge? In the midst of trying to make some sense of his predicament and possibly going over and over things in his mind, trying to find that thing he said or did that was not right and how he might deal with it, as in what offering or penitence he might offer for it, and he simply can't find it. In his nightmare existence, he is simply spewing forth near nonsense. And it would appear that God, while he understands, is not about to take it lying down. This is one reason why he will eventually confront Job. In the 35th chapter, at the end, in the 16th verse, Elihu makes the indictment. After repeating Job's words that appear to lift him up above God in righteousness, Elihu lays it out. 35:16, therefore does Job open his mouth in vain. He multiplies words without knowledge. Job has no idea what he's talking about. Thing is that Job has been searching to know why God was doing to him what he thought God was doing to him, because in the one verse, Job asked, if this isn't God, then who is it? How often do we pop off at the mouth in our lack of understanding and knowledge? Way too often. But the thing between God and Satan had been that if God did this or that, Job would curse him to his face, and this Job never did. You know she's right. She continues, Job could not understand what or why any of what had happened to him happened. God does not need to explain himself, folks. And this, too, Elihu intimates as he speaks. But we're asking, who is this Elihu? Chapter 36 starts laying out some statements that are odd for a person to make. 36:2, suffer me a little, and I will show you that I have yet to speak on God's behalf. To speak for God? To set any record straight on God's behalf? Why does God need anyone to talk for him? And moreover, other than the prophets, who would God in this time, before the law of Moses, even pick? 36:3, I will fetch my knowledge from afar and will ascribe righteousness to my Maker. Well, that sounds nice, but it's also quite arrogant to say. However, 36:4 is a breadcrumb. Look at how it's said. For truly my words shall not be false. He that is perfect in knowledge is with you. I'm saying, wow, that's kind of a loaded statement, Elihu. Aren't we getting a little too big for our britches? Just saying. Daughter of Zion eternally continues. In the transliteration, we see this, quote, that truly not false declarations of me, flawless one of knowledge, with you, unquote. Lots of question marks and then, wow, followed by an exclamation mark. He that is perfect in knowledge is with you, in the midst of you all. Elihu is referring to himself. He is the quote-unquote flawless one of knowledge. And there's only one who has the right and the privilege to make such a statement. That person would have to be none other than the Word pre-incarnate. He who is also called the capital A angel of the capital L-O-R-D or Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Now, angel in Hebrew is also termed as messenger. Right there, you get into the idea of being sent to speak on behalf of. This is what Jesus, as quote-unquote the capital angel of the capital L-O-R-D, and as the Christ does. Elihu will go from verse 3 through 16 of this chapter to talk about God, and virtually every statement can be verified elsewhere in Scripture as being about God himself. She does not list them. But this is chapter 36. She continues. In chapter 37, Elihu trembles, or says he trembles and his heart is moved at the quote-unquote voice of God. Then he goes on to talk about that voice, and a close read reminds you of stuff one King David of Israel will one day also write about the voice. But if we had our doubts as chapter 38 opens, we hear from God himself. The chapter opens as the whirlwind comes, or the vortex cloud that would one day perhaps show up with one Moses appears, and the quote-unquote voice starts talking. And what does Yod-He-Vav-He, or the capital Lord, say? 38:1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, 38:2, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Wait, Elihu has said this in chapter 35, verse 16. Therefore does Job open his mouth in vain. He multiplies his words without knowledge. Then the Lord, Yod-He-Vav-He, says that Job is darkening counsel by words without knowledge. They say the same thing. Interesting person, this Elihu, who, as far as this is concerned, cannot be anyone else other than the Word pre-incarnate. And that will do it for this episode of This and That. Until then.